I'm Scott. Welcome back to Canard Boulevard. Today, I'm going to be answering your questions. Coming up. I haven't done one of these videos in a while. I think I've done 3 of them before. But what I do is I collect the various questions that I get asked on all the different videos that I post, and ones that get asked more than a few times or that are particularly interesting, then I will compile into one of these videos that hopefully covers information that you find interesting. The first one I got was actually very interesting to me, and it was not a question, it was actually some information that I did not know. And this was posted on the oxygen concentrator video, which I will put up here, and it is where I test an oxygen concentrator in the airplane to supply supplemental oxygen at altitude. I've been using that in my airplane for over a year now. It works extremely well. So this was from somebody who apparently knows a lot about these, and he is talking about the dangers of using oxygen concentrators in airplanes if there is any carbon monoxide present. And that is because the molecules of carbon monoxide, or CO, are actually smaller than oxygen molecules, which is O2. The way the oxygen concentrators work is they have what's called a molecular sieve, and it is a very, very fine mesh or filter, for lack of a better word, that is so small that the larger nitrogen molecules can't fit through it, but oxygen can. And because our air is 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen, if you strip out that 78% nitrogen, what you get left is mostly oxygen. So that's great, because that means it can deliver concentrated oxygen to your cannula. When you breathe it in, you get much more oxygen, and therefore you do not get hypoxic at altitude. The problem is that CO is small enough that it will also fit that through that molecular sieve. The problem is if you have any carbon monoxide in your cockpit, percentage-wise, it might be only 1% carbon monoxide compared to all the oxygen and nitrogen, which is not really going to do a whole lot of harm to you. But if you strip all the nitrogen out of it, the percentage of what's left coming through to you becomes much, much higher. It's actually concentrating the carbon monoxide along with the oxygen. So it's now delivering concentrated carbon monoxide to you, which can be lethal because it does not take a whole lot of carbon monoxide to knock you out. So it is absolutely critical that when you're using an oxygen concentrator in your airplane, that you absolutely must have at least 1 carbon monoxide detector in your airplane. I have 2. If it detects any percentage of carbon monoxide, even a small amount, you must discontinue use of the oxygen concentrator. In my airplane, that's not a big problem because I have air coming in from the front and there is no engine up there. All the exhaust is sent out the back behind the airplane. So when I'm at altitude using an oxygen concentrator, all the air coming in is fresh air, unless I turn on the heat, and my heat is a muff over the exhaust, just like in a Cessna. So if that ever cracks or fails, I potentially could draw in carbon monoxide into there and bring it in the airplane, and that would be lethal if I was using the oxygen concentrator, which means I need to have that carbon monoxide monitor operating in the airplane. And if you use an oxygen concentrator in your airplane, you should have at least 1 carbon monoxide detector in there as well. He also mentioned in the video where I flew through smoke that you should definitely clean the filters after flying through wildfire smoke because that smoke will tend to clog up the filters. So that's actually a really good point. I will do that. Enough about oxygen concentrators. This person wrote, I noticed when you do your takeoff, rolls, and landings, your nose tends to porpoise a bit. Is that something common to canards? No. When Rutan originally designed the Long Easy, it had just the nose strut, which is that fiberglass strut that you saw me build in this video. And that strut bends and absorbs bumps in the runway. It had just a solid worm gear drive to a handle in the cockpit that you would turn up and down. And the Cozy, the original design of the Cozy was exactly the same. There is no impact resistance or spring or anything in that drive mechanism. The strut itself bending was the entire shock absorption system for the nose gear. When motorized nose gears came into fashion, like mine has, the developers decided, oh, we're going to put springs in there because it'll give it a softer ride, or for whatever reason they decided to put springs in there. And so all the airplanes with those motorized drives have springs in the extension mechanism. And there is quite a bit of lever. If you look at the wheels way down here and the actuators up here and it pivots. So it doesn't take much effort to put a huge amount of pressure on the springs. So the springs are big, beefy things. However, it is a spring and it's not damped, so any energy you put into that spring, it pushes right back out. The end result is, well, there's two problems with that. One is what you saw, it gets bouncy. If you hit a bump and it bounces down and it compresses that spring, well, it pushes it right back out. A car has a damper in there with an oil-filled chamber with a small orifice that squirts the oil through that slows the damping, usually more on the rebound on the compression. But it slows how much that spring can move. So if you get a bump, it doesn't just spring you right back, it bumps and then it slowly brings it back out, slowly being a relative turn. But you don't have that on these airplanes, and as a result, it's very bouncy. You literally, the front end is a spring. And that's why you see that porpoising, and it's not good. If you saw one of my very early videos where I hit a bump in the runway and the rebound caused the airplane to rotate before it was at flying speed on a runway going towards trees. And I had to push the nose over and hold it in ground effect in order to get up over the trees. It was extremely dangerous. That was actually the takeoff that made me leave that airport, because that was my original airport I was at. So that's the first problem. The second problem is when you load up the front end. So if I load up my front seats to 400 pounds, which is the maximum capacity I can carry in the front seats, all that weight in the front of the airplane compresses the spring, the nose gear goes up, and now the whole airplane is sitting down, and it's almost 3 degrees of incidence lost on the Canard when I have the front seats loaded up. And that means I need way, way, way more airspeed on the ground before I can get enough lift out of the Canard to actually lift the nose up and then get the main wing flying. The main wing will fly just fine, but it can't because it hasn't yet reached its angle of attack to generate enough lift. And the reason it can't do that is because the Canard hasn't started generating enough lift to lift the nose up with 400 pounds of weight in there. And the reason it's not doing that is because it's got 3 degrees negative angle of incidence because the spring is compressed. So it's going like this until it gets so much air that at full back on elevator, it's starting to pull up, and then it gets enough lift and it finally goes up. And by then I'm at like 85 or 90 knots indicated on, so I'm going across the ground, potentially 85 or 90 knots if there's no headwind. That's not good, and that uses up a ton of runway. Now, when Mark Zeitlin brought out his motorized landing gear last year, he dispensed with that spring altogether and went back to the original strut where it's just bending the strut alone. And that is actually what I am doing to my airplane, because I really do not like having that spring in there. I'm going to do some design retrofit on my existing actuator, and I've ordered the parts to do it. They should be getting here next week, and that is a project that's going to be coming up very soon, and of course I will be doing a video on that, but that spring will be going away. Then I'll be doing a whole bunch of testing to see just how much of a difference it makes, and I'm hoping it makes a considerable difference. All right, next question. Question about landing a Canard. Often I see the nose coming down a little faster and I see the suspension working, again, the front spring. But on this landing, it seemed much more gentle. Does carrying a bit of extra speed allow you to bring the nose down more gently? Actually, it's the opposite. So when I first did my transition training in this, the speeds I had been led to believe were appropriate for this airplane were quite a bit higher than what should be flown at for landing. I was crossing the numbers at 80 or 85 knots, and when you get it on the ground, when the wheels touch down, you're still doing 80 knots. So if you can imagine coming into land at 80 knots, the friction of when the wheels touch, it's a sudden acceleration of those wheels, and you get a lot of friction, and at 80 knots it gets enough forward motion like that it just punts the nose into the ground. And of course, once that happens, now you have negative incidence on the Canard, and it's generating down force rather than up force, so it just kind of punts down and pump. So that's not great. It's obviously not great for the nose wheel, and it's not great for the main wheels either, or your tires, or your brakes. So I did a bunch of experiments where I was landing slower and slower and slower. Because ideally you would want to land at about your stall speed, which is 63 knots on this. So I started coming across, bringing it back. As long as it wasn't gusty, I was trying to come over the numbers at 70, maybe even 68 knots. In some cases I got it down to 65. That was definitely too slow because you lose a lot of aileron authority at that speed and you have to start using rudders. But I tried 70, and I think that's exactly what you saw me doing in this video where he was talking about. And because it's enough slower that it doesn't do that, and so what I can do is as soon as the mains touch, I'll actually apply a little bit of back pressure, and it takes some practice and timing, but if you watch the video, you can tell the instant the mains touch, watch the elevators because you'll see them move down. And that's me applying back pressure. And the reason for that is now the mains are on the ground. I'm gonna hold the nose up with the elevator because now I've got all this wing and canard, and it's like a giant sail, and it helps air brake. And so it slows down the airplane without me using brakes at all. And of course, as soon as the canard loses enough speed that it can no longer fly, even at that heightened angle of attack, it then quits flying and the nose comes down, and then I brake. And I've been trying to do that more and more often on most of my landings, and I think that's maybe what you've been seeing. All right, another question. What engine is in your Cozy, and what is your static takeoff RPM? The engine is an IO360, a standard Lycoming IO360. The static RPM with the prop I currently have is 2200 RPM, and I'm not overly happy with that. The previous prop I had, the static RPM was 2350. I have been talking to Cato about this recently, and they have offered to do me a different prop that will give me more static RPM and maybe a little bit RPM in cruise, because technically this engine should be able to cruise at 2700 RPM, and that should give me 180 horsepower at that. I never get close to that. The only way I can ever get up to a 2700 RPM is if I am full throttle and descending. So the prop, I think, has a little bit too much cruise in it. I think it's too much pitch and a little too much drag. So they're actually doing some math. I sent them a whole bunch of numbers and they're doing some math, and I think they're gonna work out a different prop for me that gives me a little bit better static RPM, which means shorter takeoff runs because more power, and as well as maybe a little bit of top end speed, which would be nice as well because of a higher RPM. The difference between the 2200 and 2350 RPM in takeoff is worth several hundred feet of takeoff run on the runway. It's significant because at 2200 RPM, I don't remember the actual chart numbers, I think it's around 140 horsepower that the engine is. At 180 horsepower, which is what it's rated for, is at 2700 RPM. At 2200 RPM, I believe it's about 140, so I'm only making 140 horsepower at that RPM. That is assuming that it's also a standard pressure temperature day. So on hot days, I could be even doing a little bit less. But that is the plan going forward. So yes, again, more videos about that coming up in the future. It would be nice if you could explain the process to certify the pitot static transponder are working as expected. Yeah, this came in the comment on the recent video here where I flew to New Philadelphia to get my biannual pitot static transponder check. I had actually meant to do all of that, show all the equipment and show the process, and the problem was I just got so involved in talking to the guy about how everything worked, I totally forgot to video any of it. What they do is they hook up a specialized machine. One hookup has a hose that goes to the pitot tube, the other one goes onto the static port, and it generates calibrated pressures that simulate various airspeeds and altitudes. And once it has moved to a certain altitude, they then check to make sure that the system is reporting what it's supposed to be. And if there is any error, they mark down what the error is. It's usually within 10 feet or so. The other thing they do is make sure that the pressure altitude being reported by the transponder is correct. And then they have this other box, which they told me is $30,000, and it simulates ATC, and it interrogates the transponder and makes sure that the data being sent by the transponder is correct. So that's basically what they do. It took them about an hour and a half to do. Not a huge involved process, but it does take very specialized calibrated equipment to do it. All right, this is a question that I was dreading. Why are you smooching the mic? And this is what he's referring to. It's a really bad habit I've gotten into. The microphone on this headset, this Lightspeed Delta Zulu headset, I don't know what it is, but it has to be really, really close to your mouth, your lips, or if it's any distance away, you get a ton of cockpit noise. So it really needs to be close. And I noticed that as I'm not using it, then I need to make a radio call and I need to shove it up to my lips because it gradually works itself away. And what I've started doing, I've realized, is pushing my lips out just to feel to make sure that the microphone is close enough before I start talking. And I'm just doing it all the time obsessively now, and I didn't realize it until I was looking at the video. I'm like, I look like an idiot. I'm kissing my microphone. So that's why I'm trying to not do that, but that's what's going on. I noticed you removed the sunscreen, but it has left a considerable mark on the glass, which you can see here what he's talking about. Any observations you care to share with us? Yes. I'm an idiot and I didn't read the instructions. You're only supposed to leave that thing on for the duration of the flight at the most. It says don't leave it on overnight, don't leave it on for days. Well, I left it on all weekend because I was just being lazy and didn't read the instructions. And when I went to peel it off, some of the stuff that keeps it stuck to the window came off. It still works fine, but it was annoying. So yeah, pilot error. I'm curious what your takeoff distance is. Looking at your takeoff from KUCP, it looks like you rotated around 1,600 feet down the runway. Is that normal for a Canard? Well, actually, I measured it. It was 1,700, so you're pretty close. 1,700 for my airplane on a reasonably hot day like it was there. That's about normal for me by myself. For my airplane. I'm hoping with a faster prop on there with a better static RPM, I could get that down maybe 1,450, 1,500 RPM. And of course, if it's a cold day where you're making more power, more dense air, it goes down. And this is really dependent on front seat weight. I can do a 1,700 foot takeoff by myself. If I put 300 pounds of crap in the back seats, it's still 1,700 feet because it depends on the weight in the front that the Canard starts to fly. So the main wing, which does all the main lifting of all the engine and all the stuff in the back seats, doesn't even start to fly until the Canard lifts it and they get enough angle that it generates lift. So it's all about getting the Canard to fly. That's where your takeoff run is. So if you have more weight in the front seats, the Canard takes longer to fly, you use more runway. If you can get up to a faster airspeed quicker, that means you're going to use less runway. If I'm by myself in the front and it's 1,600 or 1,700 feet, and then I put an extra 200 pounds of stuff in the back and maybe full of fuel, it's still 1,600 or 1,700 feet because it's how much is the Canard lifting in the front seats, and there's not much else up there other than some lead ballast in the nose. At that 1,700 feet, the Canard starts flying, and then the main wing lifts up regardless of how much weight is in the back. Of course, now your overall climb performance is going to differ if you have a lot more weight, but in terms of getting off the runway, it's all about the Canard and the front seats. Okay, this was a question about the ADS-B billing video, which I will put a link to up here. He says, can't you just switch your ADS-B to VFR aircraft and they'll have nothing on you? ADS-B doesn't work that way. It's not like your transponder. It's not transmitting the code that you're dialing into the transponder. It's actually sending a preset hex code, which is basically your N number encoded in hex. So regardless of what your transponder is set to, it's transmitting a hex code that ties back to your N number in your airplane. You can get anonymous hex codes that don't actually decode to your N number, but there are still ways that you can look those up in the FAA and get the airplane N number. So no, there's not much you can do outside of redoing the entire ADS-B system and encrypting everything. That's never going to happen. Or just enacting laws that make it illegal to use ADS-B for anything other than what it was intended for, safety of flight. That's what we need. All right, this is a question after I added the boat tail to the lower cowl last winter. I looked at your next videos and didn't find if you saw any more speed out of the boat tail. I did. The first one I flew, I went up and I think I mentioned it, but yes, I got 5 knots out of that. I was hoping for maybe 2 or 3. I went up and I saw 5 knots. I was like, woohoo! When I put that boat tail on there, the idea was to try to get rid of that separation, because the original cowl kind of like had a bump here and then it kind of cut up, and so I had air separation. It would come along there and then it would burble and separate and go into the prop, all this separated air. So I made it smooth and into a boat tail to try to stop that separation, and the hope was that I'd gain a couple knots doing that, and I didn't really know if it was going to work, so I didn't go to a lot of effort to really smooth and finish the boat tail. It's kind of rough looking, and I did just a quick paint coat on it. Went up and saw 5 knots. I was like, holy crap. So this winter I'm going to take it back off, and I'll do the proper finishing. I'll re-micro it and sand it and smooth it and make it look nice, paint it up and finish it. So yes, definitely was worth the effort. This guy said, I'm looking for the O2 generator to see what type you bought and if you're still happy with it. Ever use it with 2 people? The one I have is an Inogen, and I think it's a G3. And yes, absolutely still happy with it. Works amazingly well. Use it with 2 people all the time. We go up, whenever I fly with my wife, we go up, we both go on it. It works fine. We both stay at 100% saturation. We flew up to Canada. The trip I flew to Canada in the smoke, we were both on it, and we were, I think, 11,000, 12,000 feet, and we were both still at 100% saturation. So yes, works amazingly for 2 people. I've not had it up at like 17 or 18 on 2 people. I know it kept me at like 98 on my own at 18,000. Whether it would do that for 2 people or not, I haven't tested it, so maybe. To end off this video, I wanted to talk about the Oshkosh video, which I will put a link to again up here. The Oshkosh video really surprised me. The idea behind that video was a day in the life of a pilot who just flew his airplane to Oshkosh and is camping there, and here's what it's like, and here's what the weather's like, here's the vendors, and so on. And I really wanted to walk around and present it from that aspect, because if you look at all the Oshkosh videos, it's all interviews and production and airplanes and talking heads, and I didn't want that. I wanted just man on the street, here's what it's like video, because that's what I would have liked to have seen when I wasn't going to Oshkosh. And apparently that's what people wanted, because I got so many comments about that video, comments saying it was the best Oshkosh video they ever saw. So many people told me that, and I really wanted to thank all the people that went out of their way just to write a comment saying, I love this video, great video, all that kind of stuff. And there's no way I can actually go through all those comments. There's just so many of them, but I will show them here just because I wanted to show that people genuinely love that video. And if you've not seen that video yet, you should probably go have a look at it, because apparently it's a great video. I really like it, and my dad loved it, which is really kind of who I do these videos for, is so that he can see these videos. In the meantime, if you have any other questions that you want answered, leave them in the comments section below, or suggestions for videos you might like to see. If you like this video, please click like and give it a thumbs up. It really helps me out. And click subscribe on this channel if you haven't already. That really helps me out when people subscribe to the channel. All right, thanks for watching.